We have covered many Mega Man X games on this channel. We tackled some on-time classics like Mega Man X1 and the all-time classic 2D platformer Mega Man X4. And we tackled some outliers, you can say, like Mega Man X3, the Extreme Duology, and oh god, this is gonna be hard. Mega Man X6. But there is one Mega Man game that is pretty infamous among not only Mega Man fans, but people who play video games, and that game is Mega Man X7. Mega Man X7 is a game I think needs no introduction whatsoever. Mega Man X7 was meant to be a next big step for the Mega Man X franchise, with it going full 3D, and it being released on the most popular console of the 6th generation, the PlayStation 2. But instead, we got a game that is none of those things. Now, Mega Man X6 is a game I did not like whatsoever. It was a game that made me feel angry or nothing whatsoever. It gets my vote for one of the worst games on the original PlayStation. Now, most people who are watching this video are probably thinking that I hate Mega Man X7 more than Mega Man X6, but I am sorry to disappoint, but I didn't hate it as much as Mega Man X6. The development of Mega Man X7 is something we know a bit about. Inafune had very little involvement in Mega Man X7 like with Mega Man X6. He did two things with this game. He lent advice to the illustrators on creating the new protagonist for this game, Axel, and he had the mindset that 3D is simply a graphical style, more so than it being a main gameplay changer. What I think he meant by this is that Mega Man X7 should have been a 3D game in terms of the graphical style, but a 2B game in terms of gameplay. But instead we get a game that blends 3D and 2D gameplay. But what is my history with this infamous game? Back in the X6 video, I took a break after I completed Mega Man X6 because it was one of the most frustrating first playthroughs I have ever played and moved on to other games at the time. It wasn't until mid-2021 that I finally got to play Mega Man X7 and Mega Man X8 on the Legacy Collection. My first playthrough of Mega Man X7 was not as frustrating as Mega Man X6, and after I finished it, I knew it was bad, but I felt like I wasn't getting that same feeling that everyone said was one of the worst games they've ever played. I did a 0 playthrough and an X playthrough, and again, I still wasn't getting one of the worst games vibes from it. Now, it has been a while since I played Mega Man X7, and opinions can change in a few years. I mean, I liked X3 when I first played it in 2020, but in 2023, when I released my video on it, I thought it was one of, if not the Mega Man game of all time. So let's see how Mega Man X7 stacks up compared to some of the other Mega Man games I don't like. With that out of the way, let's get started. The setup of Mega Man X7 is that after the events of Mega Man X5 and Mega Man X6, the Earth became quite inhabitable, so Ripblades have worked diligently to clean up the world and make it habitable for humans once again, and are slowly recovering. However, Maverick crime is on the rise. The Maverick hunters have become weaker ever since X retired from the front lines to assume a support role and achieve more peaceful solutions for the war. To take care of the rising crime, a group of vigilantes called Red Alert was created under the command of Red. Initially, they only fought against Mavericks, but one day the group changed and began acting strange. One of their key members, Axel, noticed he was being used and went AWOL. The game begins with Axel clearly on the run, but Red sends a giant mechanoid to take him back, but it is stopped with the help of Zero at the end of the opening stage. Axel is taken to the Maverick Hunters headquarters and is told off by X and the Maverick Hunters. Red contacts them and issues a challenge for them. He releases some of the Mavericks Red Alert had in custody to various locations around the globe. The challenge is that the Maverick Hunters must defeat all the Mavericks he released, and if they do the job, they will get Axel. Zero and Axel head out into the field to defeat the Mavericks, setting up Mega Man X7. Now, something I could give X7 in terms of the setup is that it does something I liked about the setup of Mega Man X6, and that was making it very interesting. The game starts with the monologue about all that has happened in between X6 and X7, and we are then shown a cutscene featuring Red Alert doing the job. I also think it was a good idea to have the game start with Axel instead of X or Zero, since it shows us what this new character can do, but everything else surrounding the setup is all stuff we could talk about when I get to the gameplay and the presentation. Speaking of gameplay, The gameplay of Megaman X7 is going to be longer than the other videos on the X series now that we are dealing with a new dimension. Now, I want you to keep this in mind when I'm talking about the way the characters feel and control in this section of the video. I have not played Mega Man Legends, so I won't use that as a way to compare since I have no first-hand experience with the game. Now, let's talk about why the controls feel like ass. Every character in this game feels so slow to move. I don't know if it actually is that way, but whenever I dash in this game, it doesn't feel faster than just walking in the previous X games whatsoever. Standard walk speed is also really slow, which makes the game feel slower paced than it should be. Another thing is that all the characters have besides Zero is the lock-on feature. The lock-on feature is pretty simple to talk about. You lock on to an enemy and the character will point and shoot at the enemy that is being locked on. Now, this is a cool idea, but there is a major problem with this feature. The game basically plays itself with this. You just need to walk near an enemy and then you shoot at them. There is no thought into shooting an enemy in this game. The lock-on is also in the 2D sections, when in reality, there didn't need to be a lock-on section in 2D to begin with. The biggest problem is that there is no option to turn off the lock-on feature in 2D, so you have to live with it every time you play this game. Now, the first character you control in this game is the new character, Axel. Axel's whole thing in this game is that he can turn into other Reploids, which is basically how the rest of the X series would focus on him with in terms of stories. This does go into the gameplay side of him with his charge shots. If you hold the triangle button, you will charge a shot that allows you to become the Reploid you defeat. Now, I think that this is a cool idea in concept. Become the enemy can be a cool way to go about the stages, but there are two major problems with this idea. The first one is that enemies take forever to kill in this game. In Deep Forest, you need a Maverick to kill to get a certain rescuable Reploid, and he is a damage sponge. The other problem is that every Maverick is slower than a Florida grandma. If you thought the characters were slow enough, the Mavericks are even slower that it feels like an eternity. It also doesn't help that in this game, the weapon bar is tied to your health upgrades, so it can either be a short time or a long time. You also have to wait for the bar to deplete before you can turn back to Axel. Just an idea that needed to be in a game that isn't X7. Then you have Zero, and he is definitely the worst playable character in the game, and probably on the list of worst playable characters in any platformer I've played. Zero is slow like all of the characters in this game, but what makes him the worst to play as is his combat stuff. What made Zero so satisfying in the previous X games is that his attacks were fast and kinetic. They can be done so effortlessly and could cross into his special techniques, making him feel like a hack and slash character in a 2D dimension. Zero in X7 has attacks that move and feel like Bayonetta using the hammer in Bayonetta 2. They came out so slowly and never feel like they connect at all. With that alone, they removed the fun of controlling Zero in the previous X games. But another thing I need to mention that might be looking too deep into this is that I don't like his air attack. It feels like it was made with 3D in mind and not 2D. And whenever I use it in 2D, it feels like pulling teeth in video game form. The final character you could play as is X. To unlock X, you must either have saved half of the rescuable Reploids in the game, or beat all the levels before doing the endgame. I think they did this because they wanted the player to be used to Axel as a playable character. Actually, while writing the script, I thought about this. I might be wrong about what I'm about to say here, but I feel like this game is inspired a bit by Metal Gear Solid 2. What I mean by this is that the advertising showed you playing the character you expect to play as in the game, but you play as a different character and you are stuck with them for the rest of the game. I think Metal Gear Solid 2 did it better though, since in the first section of the game, you play as Solid Snake, and after the section, you then play as Raiden. But Snake isn't sidelined for the rest of the game and is still active in the plot. But in Mega Man X7, you have to either get half of the rescuable Reploids or beat all of the levels to unlock X as a playable character. By the time that you unlock him in the game, you will probably already have a good chunk of the power-ups in the game and about half the heart tanks, which sucks because I think X is the best character to play as in this game. He is still slow, but the charge shot is what makes X in this game. The charge shot is one of the most powerful combat options in the game. They do a shit ton of damage and kill almost anything in one shot. Not to mention the armor you get throughout the game, but we can get to that later. So yeah, the gameplay is not all that fun to go through. It makes the game not all that fun to control. The presentation of Mega Man X7 is straight up just laughable. This was the first Mega Man X game to be a 3D game, so there should be some expectations set up from the get-go from that information alone. But like the game, it falls flat. X7 does not look appealing whatsoever. Now, Mega Man X7 was made for the PS2 and was only released on the PS2, so to some extent the game should feel as if it was made for the console and not a multi-platform game. But instead we got a game that looks less appealing than Sonic Heroes on the PlayStation 2. Mega Man X7 is a very simple looking game. Models don't look all that complex and level segments aren't all that long. But I am baffled that it takes some time for the game to load between level segments. I think the longest load screen in this game is 15 seconds, which, to be fair, isn't as long as Sonic 06 or Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. But for a game that doesn't really look all that complex, I expect smaller load times. The cutscenes are also laughable if you ask me. There are just many moments in this game where I can't really stop but laugh at the game, like Splash Warfly with X, Vanishing Gungaroo with Axel, and Sniped Anteater with X.
Blonde hair and a saber? You must be Zero! So they sent an S-Class hunter to stop me, huh? But you'd need a dozen of them to beat me!
How sweet. Looks like you're having a swell time swinging around your new toy.
Stop treating me like a kid! Why, I oughta!
Hey, calm down, or you'll have to take a time out in the corner.
So you're the famous X. I thought you were out of commission.
I was put back on the job, thanks to you creeps.
So you're saying we're playing too rough? Fool! This is our natural state, just like you.
No!
Rusted old machines should stay home and play with their toasters. Take this!
Oh, splendid! Even better than expected.
How long must this madness go on?
Let me ask you, how long has this madness been going on? The annals of history contain endless records of war. The madness will never end.
You're wrong. We can create a world without war. Utopia is not just a dream.
You can't build a utopia on top of the graves of rebels like myself.
But even so, I must follow my beliefs.
It is both trying to be serious and also jokey at the same time, and it's just hilarious to watch. Also, the way the cutscenes look are not appealing whatsoever. The in-game's cutscenes remind me of Sonic Frontiers cutscenes with how stiff and robotic they are. Ironic since they are robots. But they just stand there and barely move, and when they do move, they stop and it looks unnatural. I don't think a game that came out in the generation as Sonic Adventure 2, Jak and Daxter, and I can't believe I'm saying this, motherfucking Devil May Cry 2 should look so stiff in like an early PS1 game. The 2D cutscenes also don't look all that appealing. They are just PNGs on two different sides of the screen, and they still have terrible voice acting, so they just don't work for me. At least we see Zero and Axel looking like they are confessing their feelings in this one, but we stan X and Zero being gay on this channel. Now, I won't be getting into the story when talking about the cutscenes. I am talking about the voice acting. There should be something to be said about how the actors sound in the game. Axel, I think, sounds too young and childish.
I'm not gonna run off, so could you take this thing off?
Zero sounds a little too deep for my liking.
Well, this is turning into a real mess.
And X sounds way too serious for the role, to the point that it reminds me of Roger doing Sonic in Frontiers.
How can you say that? If we fight, we'll fall right into their hands. We can't allow this madness to continue.
Now, if there is one thing I think this game gets right, like most Mega Man titles, it's the music. Shocking, I know. Mega Man X7, while not my favorite Mega Man soundtrack, is one that I can vibe to. The overall sound makes it feel like a Spider-Verse soundtrack with the record scratches or similar sounds that are in most of the songs. Definitely a good soundtrack in a bad game. The level design of Megaman X7 is something alright. I will say that the opening stage is probably the most okay stage in the game. It does a good job telling you how the mechanics of the game work, and you get a feel on how Axel and Zero play. But other than that, I think the other stages are pretty bad. Let's go the route I normally play in this game. Vanishing Gungaroo is not really a stage. It's more of an enemy gauntlet where you go room to room and fight enemies, and I don't think the characters in this game have interesting combat options or game feel to make it fun whatsoever. Then we go to Ride Borski's level, which is a ride chaser level, like Jet Stingray and Volt Kraken stages. The controls of the ride chaser are not good. You can only go forward and shoot. Why this doesn't work is that you can't stop, it can only slow down. So when you go past something important like a bomb or an upgrade, you will need to go all the way back to where the upgrade or bomb is. It doesn't help that you are on a timer for this stage, so you need to do all of this before you die. I think the level and the ride chaser itself shows that some things that work in 2D just don't work in 3D whatsoever. Next is Tornado Tunyon stage. This is the Infinity Maginion of Mega Man X7. It is a straight hallway where all you do is shoot while there is a giant robot that is trying to defeat you. After the first section, you fight the giant robot, and it is one of the most brain-dead, boring segments I have played in a platformer. I swear to Christ, I have had this crustaceous crab not come out of a shell and let me attack him for 2 minutes straight. It makes the pacing of this level the worst of the main stages. We will get to that stage at the end of the game, don't you worry! The next stage is Splash Warflies. Splash Warflies stage kinda shows one of the main problems with this game, and it's the enemy placement. One thing 3D platformers need to nail is a reason to defeat enemies, and I don't think that Mega Man X7 does this well. Enemy drops, to me at least, feel like they don't have a good amount of a drop weight. It also doesn't help that in the 3D sections of Mega Man X7, you could easily go around them. I can't believe I am saying this. The Spark the Electric Jester 2 did a better job at this when it has almost all the problems I said. But other than that, I think this stage is okay. There's nothing about it that actively infuriates me, and that's about it. When Krorang, on the other hand, is an infamous level. I think everyone almost knows why this is one of the worst levels in the series, and it's the airship section. That is the first section of the level. I think a level where you go from airship to airship is a cool idea and can work, but the problem that this game has is the way the camera is positioned. It makes it hard to tell if you are on top of a ship or not. It also doesn't help that the green ships can move, making platforming more difficult than it should be. I normally am against comparing things to Crash Bandicoot, but this is one of the few times that I see why people would compare it to Crash Bandicoot. Other than that, the rest of the stage exists. Then we go to Soldier Stone Kong, the only fully 2D stage in this game. This one is also a level that exists to me. There's nothing outright egregious with this level, but I will say getting everything in this level is annoying because of Axel's copy shot damage and the bulky enemies, but that's really about it. Snipe Anteater is a disorienting level to play. It's not a long level whatsoever. What makes it disorienting is the gimmick of this level. The gimmick of this level is that you need to switch between the top part of the floor and the bottom part of the floor. To do this, you need to jump in the orange wormholes. Whenever you do this, the camera turns around the character and does it again when you appear on the other side. Something about the way it moves hurts my eyes a bit, and it doesn't help that you do it more than once in this level, since you need to do this to progress through the stage or get the upgrades. Now for the final level, Flame Hyanard. Excluding the boss fight, this level is whatever. Simple 2D platforming at the beginning, and then a 3D section at the end that doesn't feel egregious to go through, and is honestly a bit too easy to choose with Axel or Glide Armor X. The bosses are also something I am not a big fan of. The okay ones to fight are Tornado Tunyon, Wind Krorang, Splash Warfly, Soldier Stone Kong, and Ride Borski. They're all easy to telegraph and don't really pose much of a problem or annoy me whatsoever. But the other 3 I have some pretty choice words about. Snipe Anteater is my least favorite boss in the game. This area is on a cylinder, and Snipe Anteater can go around the entire thing while you are stuck to the upper side of the cylinder. So if he's on the bottom side of the cylinder, that means you can barely shoot him, so it just makes the fight go longer than it should. The one that I will always hate is Flame Hyanard. He is probably the most annoying boss in the game for how you have to deal with him. You have to go up on top of his mech by shooting its legs and then climb it. You either then have to stay on the neck to shoot him to death, but if you don't know that, like on your first playthrough, then you'll have to deal with him and his clone troopers. Also, the voice lines are really annoying.
Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground!
And the final boss that is annoying to deal with is Vanishing Gungaroo. In his mech, he is fine. Once the mech is gone, he moves around faster than a college student on Starbucks coffees. It makes it hard to damage him, unless you are Axel and roll and shoot at the same time. The weapons are also ones I am not a big fan of. They just don't compare to the charge shot for X. I will say I do use Volt Tornado with X and Axel for some mini bosses. Zero's Rajanshu is a boss killer if you max out his special power up parts, and the best weapon you could get from the game is the G launcher for Axel. The main function of the weapon is not all that good, but remember that Axel gets a new gun every time a boss is dead, and the G launcher shots has the best DPS in the game, and it's part of the reason I say that X is not all that worth it when Axel with the G launcher can rival God. One thing I will say about X7 is that I like the more streamlined item game. I always like to try and 100% Megaman X games since it's the best way to get everything out of the game. Megaman X6 faltered on this front with revisits that were almost mandatory and alternate pathways that were not fun and had upgrades you needed to beat the game with certain armors. X7's item game is more streamlined and not at all convoluted. You get everything at every stage on the first run. How you want to route it is that you do Tornado Tunyon, Splash Warfly, Ride Borsky, and Vanishing Gungaroo first and grab all the rescuable Reploids since you need half of the rescuable Reploids to unlock X as a playable character, and then go to Soldier Stone Kong, Flame Ironard, Snipe Anteater, and Ring Crow Ring since those stages have the armor capsules for X for the glide armor. Now, I don't recommend doing this personally. What I recommend doing is gearing your playthroughs to a certain character. Like if I want to play the game casually, I will play the game with Axel and Zero. If I want to 100% the game, I will just play as X via New Game Plus, since I don't think that he is worth it in a regular run of X7. Now let's talk about the armor parts for X. If you get all the parts, you will get the aforementioned glide armor. Now this is probably the worst armor in the series if I were to guess. Yes, I do prefer the Gaia armor over this armor. The first part I want to talk about is the foot parts, and they are definitely the best part in the game. They allow X to glide through the air, which can break certain levels like Flame Ironard in half. But compared to other foot parts like the blade armor in X6 or the max armor in X3, these foot parts don't really have any real use for them to get anything like the previous foot parts. The head parts have a whatever part function, which is that they double the range from which X can absorb life energy and weapon energy pickups. I don't think that weapon energy is all that useful to begin with, and if you want life energy, just use the charge Volt Tornado and you'll be fine. But it's not a bad part whatsoever. The body parts alone make Glide Armor X the best character to play as in this game. There are the typical body part abilities like halves the amount of damage you take and you could get the Giga attack. But what makes this armor part is that it eliminates knockback. Knockback is the most pace breaking and annoying part of Megaman X7, so just getting the bullshit out makes the pace of the game so much better, which is why I say that the body parts make this armor for me. Then the arm parts aren't all that special. All it really does is add homing bullets to the charge shot, which don't really mean much when the charge shot basically destroys everything. Also, before we move on, I gotta talk about the way the glide armor looks. It gives me the same vibe as Miles' new Spider-Man suit in Spider-Man 2. Now you can't get that out of your head. Now, there is a story in this game, and I am going to try my damnedest to talk about the actual story and not the stuff surrounding the story like the voice acting and presentation. I know it's going to be a hard thing to go through. One thing I should mention is what I said in the X6 video, which is that I thought the X and Zero ending is the canon one compared to the other endings. I still believe that since at the beginning of the game, he is still around and still in cahoots with the Maverick Hunters, so that means that he wouldn't have been shut in a capsule or have just left X to do all the fighting. So that is why I believe the ending with both X and Zero and X6 to be the canon ending of the three. So in between being the stages, we get cutscenes telling us more about Axel and Red Alert. We also learn what's happening to Red and what will come for the final levels. Now, in these cutscenes, we learn that Axel has these abilities that allow him to transform into different Reploids, but he doesn't know how he got these abilities. I do think that the setup to Axel is a very interesting start for his journey through the X games. If only we got more X games after 2004 that aren't X Dive. The cutscenes that focus on Red take place before the events of the game. It's supposed to show how Red Alert came from a group trying to help the world to what they became during the events of the game. I do remember thinking that they took place during the game, but after a little bit of thinking, you just learn that's before the game. But I will say that I don't like that it basically screams in the cutscenes that Sigma is the one that's behind all that is happening in this game. Remember when Sigma coming back was not tiring whatsoever, or that his last battle was meant to be X5? Man, those were good times. I also kind of take issue with the fact that X just decides not to join the fight after events of Megaman X6. What makes this not work in the simple terms is that this went against what X did in the previous games. X does not like fighting. That is always gonna be there no matter what. But when the world is in danger, he is gonna make sure that the threat is neutralized, since that is the only option there is to deal with the war. That is what makes him a character that is interesting to learn about. But in Megaman X7, all he does is just stand around and complain about Axel and tell him off for almost everything. He probably tells him off for fucking existing. Maybe if X had some resentment for bringing in a new Maverick Hunter because of Double from X4, I would have no problem with that. But then again, this is Megaman X7. Overall, the story works well in terms of the ideas, but in terms of the execution, I just think it falls flat, with stuff like Sigma being the reason Red Alert went the way they did, and X being the way that he is in this game, going against who he is as a character. At least Axel's setup for who he is in this game was a good idea that was executed well enough, I suppose. But now we have reached the endgame of Megaman X7, and I think that almost everyone I know considers it the worst endgame in the entire series. The first level of the endgame is Palace Road. This is a pretty boring level to go through, even though it shouldn't be. You are chased by a mechanaloid, but it moves so slow that just walking will be able to get away from it. It also lasts a long time, which just makes it feel longer than it should be. At least the music to this level is a bop. Then we get to the final level of the game, which is Crimson Palace, and this is gonna be an interesting one. The first segment of Crimson Palace is not all that long. In fact, it's shorter than the shortest level in Mega Man X6. All that you do in this segment is go through 3 boulder segments, which either crouch under or invincibility frame your way through the boulders. After this, you then reach the boss fighter Fred. Red is a beginner's trap boss more than anything. He is hard to telegraph and hits hard for beginners since he teleports to different platforms in the arena, and most of his attacks tend to try and keep you away from him more than anything. But I'll say this, as long as you have X or Axel G launcher on your team, then you will be a-okay. He's honestly not that bad. We then reach the next segment of the level, where you need to decide which path you want to go down. You got the left path, which gives you some 2D platforming, followed by some 3D platforming, and the right path, which is an enemy gauntlet. If you want to get through this level as fast as you can, I'd say go through the enemy gauntlet, since they give you the right armor to deal with them. Then we reach the low point of the game, the boss rush. Now I said that the X6 boss rush is my least favorite boss rush in the series, but at this point, I don't know which of the two I hate the most. Both boss rushes are boring and don't have any engagement for me. I think it all comes down to this decision. Do you want a boss rush that is boring because of how easy the bosses are? Or do you want a boss rush that is boring because the bosses take forever to beat and have annoying voice lines? That's really the dilemma here. After you beat the boss rush, we reach the final boss of the game with Sigma, where we get a cutscene showing that X and Zero are unfazed by Sigma has returned, which further shows that Sigma coming back is just so fucking tiring at this point. And we also get the funniest line read in the game.
That's right, folks. I'll do it again and again. I will make X and Zero mine. Now come and get me. Give me a good fight, like you always do.
Now, as for Sigma, the boss fight. The first phase, Sigma, is nothing all that crazy. His whole thing is that he is obsessed with guns like a family from the south that lives in the mountains. But then we get to the second phase of the fight, and I gotta say the same thing I said with Red. This boss is a beginner's trap. First time players will find him hard because his attacks do so much damage and deal quite a bit of knockback like the punch attack. But when I replayed the game a few years ago, I learned of a trick to make Sigma Phase 2 the easiest boss in the game. You want to go to the far left platform and just fight him there. You can deal with so many of his attacks just by being there. His yellow orb attacks won't hit you, his Screamer attacks won't hit you if you are positioned correctly, and his crouch laser won't hit you if you move to the second platform to the left. I'd say the only attack to be worried about is his punch attack. But really, that's about it with Sigma. After you defeat him, you get a cutscene where Axel looked like he got defeated, and somehow Red survived dying, where Sigma wants to fuse with Red, where this happens.
With this power, I'll never lose!
That was just too funny not to play. Red was actually Axel who used his copy data to look like Red to deal with Sigma. We then reach the endings of the game, and they are all not good. The first ending is Axel's. In Axel's ending, he asks X why he can't join the Maverick Hunters, because X basically says he doesn't trust him. X's ending is basically the same thing as Axel's ending, where Alia tells X that he is doing great, but X7X is being X7X. It's weird that the endings are like this when it's set up that Axel wants to join the Maverick Hunters, and defeating all of Red's Mavericks was a test to see if he can join or not. So to see this basically be the anticlimactic ending that it is just feels weird to me. They totally kept this ending as a lasting effect on the mainline X games. Oh totally, I wouldn't lie to you, what are you talking about? The final ending is the Zero ending, where Zero has a dream of X being evil and aiming his buster at him. This is basically just a way to try and connect the Mega Man X games to the Mega Man Zero games. So there really isn't any reason to talk about this one. Thank God we are done with this. I think it is no shock whatsoever that Megaman X7 is easily one of the worst Mega Man games to ever exist. It did so many things wrong, from the gameplay, the level design, the presentation, and the endgame. No words can describe how awful Mega Man X7 is, when its legacy says it all with YouTube being a thing. But the question I want to pose at the end of the video is this: why do I prefer this game over Mega Man X6? And the answer I'm going to give is a pretty easy and simple one to explain. Mega Man X6 is a game that I despise more than every other Mega Man game, since it's one of the few games I played where it actively frustrates me even after 5 playthroughs of it. I know people say after a few playthroughs it gets better, but for me, it then becomes a mix of frustration and boredom. Mega Man X7 is a game that I can see why people would consider it the worst game in the series, but this game isn't frustrating to me. It's Mega Man Autopilot, where I can play this game and go through it without thinking much about it. There are moments that are frustrating, but they last a moment and not the entire stage like Metal Shark Player. That is why I prefer X7 over X6. I hope it's an answer that satisfies you. Next time when we visit the Mega Man X series, we will go into the RPG title, Mega Man X Command Mission. This one will be interesting since I never played this game before, so don't expect it to be super in-depth or anything. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and as always, have a nice day.